Hey, we're going to continue talking about Alexander the Great. In the last lesson, we talked a lot about Alexander the Great as far as being this great conqueror who conquered the Persian Empire and extended his empire all the way to India, came back and died in Babylon either from malaria or from poisoning. But after Alexander the Great died, his empire actually collapsed. It was divided into thirds, and then each one of those generals lost their land, and eventually his empire is no more. So his lasting legacy isn't his actual empire. His lasting legacy is the impact that his conquest had on the rest of the world, and this is known as the Hellenistic culture, which develops because of Alexander the Great's conquest. When we talk about Hellenistic culture, we're talking about the culture created due to the conquest of Alexander the Great, and this is when Greek culture blended with Egyptian culture, Persian culture, Indian influences. All these areas that he conquered are going to take different things from these cultures and really blend them together to come up with advancements in astronomy, math, physics, other types of science, all sorts of things, including art. And this really becomes a period where you see the world kind of share ideas and really become dominant and flourish in that way. The center of the Hellenistic world was Alexandria, Egypt. So no longer are we talking about Athens as being this powerful cultural center, but now it's Alexandria. Beautiful Egyptian city named after Alexander the Great, who basically built it almost from scratch, and it becomes a cultural, economic hub of the Hellenistic world with much of its architecture based off of Greek influences, but it also has some influences of Egyptian culture. And you can see here the plan of Alexandria that was set up when Alexander visited this area and wanted to redo the port city and make it this great city. So you can see the harbor here. Here is a Pharos, which would be the lighthouse, and then here's the city and how everything was organized. So it becomes a major port city along the Mediterranean Sea in northern Egypt, and really becomes a very wealthy and prominent point during the Hellenistic age, and is still today one of the busiest ports in the world. So you can see a picture of it here. This point here is where the lighthouse most likely was back in the day, which was one of the architectural wonders of the ancient world, and no longer there. But you can see the modern day city still there, where the ancient city was that Alexander designed a long time ago. So after Alexander died in Babylon, his body was taken to Alexandria by one of his generals, and this was the general who controlled the Egyptian part of his empire. And they built this elaborate tomb for him and had his body placed there to make Alexandria, even more important. But later on, Alexander's body disappeared, his tomb disappeared, all the writing disappeared, and it's kind of one of the mysteries of history. So overlooking the harbor, as we said earlier, there was a giant lighthouse back in the day, and this is what Alexandria would look like back in ancient times during the Hellenistic age. And the Pharos was the name of the lighthouse. It was about 350 feet high, which by putting in perspective is about the height of Nebraska's capital, and had a bronze mirror at the top. And at night, when they would light the torch, this would be visible from miles and miles and miles away. And here in this video, you can kind of see a little bit of what Alexandria and Egypt would have looked like back in the day. You can see the lighthouse in a lot of these different parts here, and really see the significance of the harbor that they had and the ports that they would have. You have the temples, the palaces, once again the lighthouse. So really an important part of Greek culture. So the streets of Alexandria were lined with statues of Greek gods and royal palaces, possess a world-famous museum and library, as you can see in this picture here. The museum itself was an institute of advanced studies, similar like what you think of as a college today or a museum today, and it was also a temple dedicated to the Muses, similar to how the Parthenon was a temple dedicated to Athena, the goddess of Athens. So the muses are the Greek goddesses of the arts and sciences. Inside of this, not only do you have a place for learning, but you had an art gallery or art galleries. You had a zoo of animals from all across the Hellenistic world. You had botanical gardens with these plants, similar to what you would see in the Henry Dorley Zoo for both of those, a dining hall, cafeteria, so to speak, that people could eat at. So one of the most famous museums of the ancient world. Also had the Alexandria Library, which had over 500,000 papyrus scrolls, which would be similar to books, and had a lot of the ancient masterpieces of the ancient literature. Some of these would actually be, original manuscripts from the time. So Alexandria was a place of a lot of learning. It was a center of Hellenistic world. One other thing that was famous from the Hellenistic world would be the Colossus of Rhodes, which is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It's the largest known Hellenistic statue. It was created on the island of Rhodes to celebrate a victory in war. And the bronze statue stood over 100 feet tall. It was an iron frame with the bronze on the outside. Looks very similar to the Statue of Liberty. We're not exactly sure what it would have looked like at the time because it did collapse and it's no longer available. It actually only stood for 50-some years before it fell down due to an earthquake. You can see in this image here, the feet are actually straddling the harbor, allowing ships to travel underneath. Most historians now believe that was not necessarily the case, but it probably stood right around the edge of the harbor, similar to what the Lighthouse in Alexandria did to allow ships to come in. So a bronze statue would be bright, shiny, over 100 feet tall, similar in size maybe to the Statue of Liberty today, although probably only about 2/3 to 3/4 of the height. And it was really the most famous sculpture of the Hellenistic age. But as I said earlier, it fell during an earthquake. They did not rebuild it because they were scared that it would offend the gods. And eventually it just kind of laid on the beaches until eventually the bronze was sold for scraps. Bringing into that. So, all right. Thank you for listening. Once again, the Hellenistic culture is the blending of Greek culture with Persian and Egyptian and Indian influences, all these areas that Alexander took over, and really leads to a period of cultural growth, education growth, science growth, and makes a lot of changes for the world. All right, thank you for listening. Talk to you later. Bye.